He sat at our kitchen table and said it like a weather report. "That old man left you nothing, Maren. He spent it all on the medical bills. Let's move on." My father had died 9 days before. I nodded. I said, "Okay." And then, 3 days later, in the basement of my father's house, I moved a shelf panel labeled Field Support and found a gray fire safe bolted to the floor. Inside was a certified insurance policy worth $2.4 million, and a note from my father that said, "You already know what this is." Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. People always say that money shouldn't be part of grief, that you should wait until the feeling settles, until the formal reading, until the appropriate moment. My father never read financial advice. He was a machinist from West Nashville who labeled his shelves in pencil and paid his insurance bill by automatic draft for 26 years without mentioning it to anyone. He didn't wait for an appropriate moment. He built something in the background, quietly, and left it exactly where he knew I would find it. I am Maren Dunhill, and I was 44 years old when I found the fire safe. I am a licensed home health aide coordinator. I manage a small team of in-home care workers for a Nashville agency serving elderly clients in the greater metro area. My work is the invisible work, the work that happens in the ordinary hours, in the patient repetition of showing up. I organized my father's care for 3 years. Carter, my husband, was elsewhere during most of it, which in our marriage had become a posture so habitual that neither of us named it anymore. He was not unkind about the caregiving. He was simply not present for it. Lars Dunhill had been a quiet man. He worked a union job at a manufacturing plant in Madison, Tennessee for 31 years, lived in the same split level in West Nashville for 40, drove the same pickup for 12, and never once mentioned his finances to anyone, including me. I had assumed, reasonably, that there was very little to mention. He had been a comfortable man, not wealthy, not struggling, and I had not thought to look any deeper than that. I was wrong by $2.74 million. The house was a modest split level on a residential street where the trees had grown through the power lines and the houses had been the same houses for 40 years. Lars's house smelled of old books, mentholatum, and something mechanical, the particular smell of a man who spent decades working with his hands and never quite left the machine shop behind. The basement was low-ceilinged and organized the way Lars organized everything, methodically, with labeled shelves and a place for everything, and everything in its place. Carter had made his pronouncement on a Saturday morning, 9 days after the funeral, sitting across from me at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee he had poured for himself. He had spoken to Lars's bank, a small local savings account, and to a man whose name he found on an old document of Lars's, who had not been Lars's attorney for 12 years. Based on these two conversations, Carter had determined that the estate consisted of the split-level house, mortgaged, the truck, paid for, and a savings account with $4,200 in it. He said it efficiently, like a man who has completed a task. "That old man left you nothing, Maren. He spent it all. Let's move on." He did not say it cruelly. He said it the way he said most practical things, with the breezy finality of a man who believes that having assessed a situation constitutes having understood it. I said, "Okay." And then I went to clear out the basement. The first sign had come in Lars's last year. He had begun asking me, during our Tuesday visits, whether Carter handled the paperwork at home, phrased with the careful indirection of a man who wants information without asking directly. I had said yes, Carter handled it, and Lars had nodded and changed the subject, and I had not understood what the question was really asking until I was standing in the basement holding his birthday card. The birthday card was the second sign. Lars had sent it 6 years before his death, the kind of card that had a sentimental message on the front and his handwriting on the inside, which was unusual because Lars did not normally give cards. Inside, he had written a paragraph of paternal advice that I had read twice and filed away. Buried in the middle of the paragraph, in his neat, mechanical handwriting, was a sequence of 4 numbers. Just 4 numbers, in the middle of a sentence about looking after myself. I had kept the card without understanding the numbers. I found it in a box in Lars's study, 2 days before I found the safe. I stood in the study when I found it, a Tuesday afternoon, the house still and cold, and I read the card again. Then I looked at the basement door. Then I went downstairs. The basement took 2 days to clear. Carter had taken on extra shifts at the logistics center, which was his version of presence during this kind of work. Available technically, absent practically. I worked shelf by shelf, exactly as Lars had organized everything, labeling items to keep, donate, or discard. On the second afternoon, I had nearly finished when I reached the back wall. The shelves there were labeled in Lars's handwriting. Hardware, old paint, tools, archive, foundation support. I moved the hardware boxes first. I pressed the lower right corner of the panel labeled Foundation Support because Lars had taught me to do that when we built the false panel together when I was 19 and he was 61, and the project had taken us an afternoon and a lot of measuring. The panel moved. Behind it was the safe. Sentry, gray, bolted to the concrete floor, heavier than it looked. The combination was in the birthday card. 4 numbers. I stood in the basement for a moment, holding the card, doing the arithmetic of my father's patience. 6 years ago, he had written those numbers, which meant he had been arranging this for at least 6 years. I dialed the combination. The safe opened. Inside, the certified copy of the insurance policy, folded once, with the beneficiary page on top. My name. A whole life policy, issued in 1998, premium paid for 26 years by automatic bank draft. Death benefit, $2.4 million. The brokerage statement, dated December of the previous year, showing $340,000 in an account designated to transfer to me on death, beneficiary designated, outside probate, mine by right of survivorship. The holographic will, 2 pages in Lars's mechanical handwriting, directing his personal property to me and naming a Nashville estate attorney as executor, and, paperclip to the front of everything, a note, index card sized, written in his handwriting. You already know what this is. Love, Dad. I sat on the basement floor for a long time. The concrete was cold. The overhead light buzzed faintly. I read the note again. Then I went upstairs, sat in my car in the driveway, and called Dorothea Kimball. Dorothea was a Nashville estate and probate attorney I had found through my agency's legal network, steady and meticulous, with a no-nonsense Tennessee manner and a long experience with estates that arrive in unconventional forms. She reviewed everything by the following Tuesday and called me with the tone of a professional who is being very careful to be calm because the news is genuinely good. Every instrument was valid. The insurance policy, maintained for 26 years, was current. The death benefit was $2.4 million. The brokerage account would transfer within 10 business days by right of survivorship, no probate. The holographic will was valid under Tennessee law. Lars had written, dated, and signed it in his own hand, and it directed his personal property to me. Total assets, $2.74 million. I listened to her go through each item, and I said very little until she was done. Carter received formal notice from Dorothea's office that Lars's estate had a valid testamentary instrument and that certain assets had already transferred outside probate directly to the named beneficiary. He called me that evening. He said he hadn't known about the insurance. I said, I know. He said, is there anything left for? I said, the policy is in my name, Carter. Dorothea will explain the rest. He went quiet. There was a long pause. He said nothing else that mattered. I brought the safe's contents home and arranged them on the kitchen table, the same table where Carter had told me Lars left nothing. I waited until he came home from work, and when he sat down across from me with his coffee and the comfortable posture of a man expecting an ordinary evening, I slid the certified policy copy across the table, open to the beneficiary page. He read it. He looked up. I slid the brokerage statement across next. He read it. He set it down. I read Lars's note aloud. You already know what this is. Love, Dad. I set the card on top of the stack. Carter looked at the table. He looked at the papers. He looked at the window. He said nothing for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. I had been sitting with what Lars had done for 3 days by then, and looking at Carter in that silence was the first time I had cried since the funeral. The insurance payment arrived in late spring, $2.4 million, in a separate account I opened in my name only on Dorothea's advice. The brokerage account had already transferred. I did not change my life immediately. I kept my job. I kept showing up for my clients, the ones who needed someone to manage their care with attention and patience, and without making a production of it. In July, I drove to Lars's house. The estate was selling it, and went to the basement one last time. The safe was gone. I had taken it. The false panel was still in place. I pressed the lower right corner, the way Lars had taught me, and it moved. The compartment behind it was empty except for the smell of old wood and metal that is the specific smell of my father's attention to things. I stood there with the panel open and thanked him for 26 years of planning done without announcement, without acknowledgement, without any expectation of return. He was still gone. That was the cost. The money was an act of love, an enormous and patient act of love, but it was not a substitute for him. He had never pretended it would be. His note had not said, "I love you." It had said, "You already know what this is." He had trusted me to understand, which was the most Lars-like thing he had ever done. Carter and I had several conversations in the months that followed, the kind of conversations that take a marriage apart and put it back in a different configuration. Those conversations are their own story. What I will tell you is that I learned something in Lars's basement that I had not fully understood before. The people who show up for you in the ordinary hours, the ones who drive to the Tuesday visits and manage the discharge paperwork and coordinate the care without being asked twice, those people are not invisible to everyone. Sometimes the person who sees them most clearly does the most careful work to make sure they know it. Pay attention to what the people who love you quietly carry. The work that doesn't generate receipts is still work, and the person who does it is worth protecting. What would you have done, dear listeners, if you had found something like this after a loss? A safe, a document, a number that changed everything you thought you knew? Tell me in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening. Let me tell you a few more things, dear listeners, because some stories have rooms inside them that I haven't yet opened. Lars Dunhill had been a machinist for 31 years at a plant that made precision parts for agricultural equipment, gears, bearings, the small metal things that make larger metal things work. He had spent his career doing the kind of work that no one thinks about until it breaks, which is the truest thing I can say about his professional life. He had been good at it. He had received 3 commendations in 31 years, which in a union shop is a significant record, and he had never mentioned any of them unless you asked directly. When he retired, the plant gave him a walnut-framed photograph of the team and a Craftsman tool set in a red steel box, and he took both home and set them in the basement, where I found them when I was clearing his things. The insurance policy had been purchased in 1998, which means Lars had been paying premiums since I was 17 years old. He had started the policy 1 year before I finished high school, which I have thought about many times since the basement. He was planning something for me before I had any idea what my life would become. He was watching the trajectory of a daughter who worked hard and asked for little, and he was building something in response to that observation, quietly, for 26 years. The premium payments came from a small, separate checking account that Carter had never known about. Lars had funded it from monthly transfers out of his primary account, small enough to be unremarkable, consistent enough to add up. Over 26 years, he had paid approximately $187,000 in premiums. The return on that investment, in the form of the $2.4 million death benefit, is the kind of math that Lars would have understood and appreciated without saying much about it. The holographic will named Dorothea Kimball as executor because Lars had hired her 12 years before his death to review his estate planning. She had met with him once, reviewed his documents, made 2 recommendations, one of which was the brokerage account beneficiary designation, and billed him for 2 hours. He had called her again when he prepared the holographic will and asked her to be executor, explaining that he wanted someone who knew the paperwork and could move efficiently. She had agreed. She had not heard from him again until I called. She told me, when I thanked her for her work on the estate, that Lars had been the most organized client she had encountered in her 30 years of practice. She said it without sentiment, which was, I think, the way Lars would have wanted to be remembered. The cabin, dear listeners. I should tell you there was no cabin in Lars's estate. What Lars had was a split level in West Nashville, a pickup, a tool set, and 26 years of discipline. That was everything. He had not needed a second property. He had needed a fire safe and a birthday card, and the patience of a man who understood that the most important things are the ones you do without an audience. The safe was the cabin. The birthday card was the map. I visited the house one more time in August, after the estate sale had cleared it. The split level stood on its street with its new emptiness, the labeled shelves in the basement removed, the false panel in the back wall still in place because no one except me knew it was a panel. The new owners would discover it eventually, or they wouldn't. It didn't matter. What it held had already found its way to the right hands. I drove back to Nashville through the long summer evening, the light going orange and flat over the hills, and I thought about showing up. About the Tuesday visits that nobody had required me to make. About the discharge paperwork that nobody had asked me to handle. About the 3 years of invisible coordination that had cost me time and energy and the gradual acceptance of Carter's absence. And how Lars had watched all of it and responded in the only way he knew, with precision and patience and 26 years of automatic bank drafts. That is the story. That is the whole of it. The people who love you most do their most careful work quietly, and they trust you to find it. If you have ever cared for someone without being asked, without being thanked, without expecting anything in return, I want you to know. Someone is watching, and they may already be building something for you. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me your story. I read every one. There were several weeks between Carter's kitchen table pronouncement and the moment the insurance claim was paid, and I want you to understand what those weeks were like. I told Carter about the safe the evening I brought the documents home. His first reaction was silence. His second was a series of questions that were really one question in several forms. Was any of it available to him? I told him the policy was in my name. I told him the brokerage account had transferred to me by right of survivorship. I told him Dorothea would explain the rest. He called Dorothea the following morning. She explained the rest. He did not call me again that day. We had a series of conversations over the following weeks, careful, quiet, the kind of conversations that couples have when the architecture of a marriage has shifted and neither person is sure yet what the new structure supports. I did not use the money as a weapon. I did not threaten. I said what was true. The assets were mine. They were separate. And what happened to the marriage was a different question than what happened to the inheritance. Carter was a practical man. He understood the distinction when it was stated clearly. We talked about what we each needed. We talked about what the marriage had been and what it had stopped being. Those conversations took several months and were, in their own way, the most honest we had had in years. I will not tell you what we decided, because that is not this story's story. I will tell you that I kept my name on the account, and that Dorothea's oversight ensured that every instrument was handled correctly, and that by the end of that spring, I had a clear understanding of what I held and what I could do with it. What I did first was buy a better vehicle for my work. The agency used my personal car for client visits, and I had been driving a 12-year-old sedan with 147,000 miles on it. I bought a new one, reliable, practical, large enough for the medical equipment I sometimes transport. I paid cash. The salesman looked at me with the particular expression that salespeople produce when a woman pays cash for a vehicle without discussion, and I smiled at him and took the keys. Lars would have approved of the transaction. I did not stop working. I did not move to a larger house. I did not announce anything. I kept showing up for my clients, the ones who needed someone to coordinate their care with patience and consistency. I kept managing my team, the home health aides who did the Tuesday visits and the discharge paperwork, and the 100 invisible tasks that constitute the actual labor of keeping someone safe in their own home. I understood their work from both sides now, as a coordinator and as a daughter who had done it. And the understanding made me, I think, a better manager. The safe is in my office now. Sentry, gray, bolted to nothing anymore because I had it professionally removed from the basement floor and refinished and placed on the shelf in my home office between a lamp and a small wooden box that had also been Lars's. It sits there. It holds nothing now. I removed the documents when Dorothea filed everything, but I kept it because it is the shape of what my father built for me. The shape of 26 years of quiet attention. I look at it sometimes when I am at my desk. I think about a man who labeled his shelves in pencil and paid his premiums by automatic draft, and trusted his daughter to find the panel when the time came. He was right to trust me. I found it.